3, 2, 1, go. Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Unsold Podcast. I'm your host Santhosh Venkatesh and I have a very special guest today in Nishant Kumar. Nishant is a senior product consultant with over 16 years of experience in building data-driven product development and building great product teams. And ever since I've been doing content marketing for SaaS and B2B SaaS companies for the past 7 to 8 years, I've always been fascinated by how great products and great product teams are built in relation with customers, in relation with the market at large, and in relation with emerging technologies. And today, this is exactly what I wanted to talk to Nishant about. So, without any delay, let's get to the conversation. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Unsold Podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Nishant Kumar, senior product leader. And I would like to welcome him. Welcome, Nishant. How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me here. I'm feeling great. Awesome.
Right, fantastic. So I've always been looking into speaking to product guys, especially senior product leaders like you, because as before the conversation, I was saying that a recent webinar which I was part of, I learned something new which I didn't know before, that apparently 15% of SaaS companies achieve product market fit, while the other 85% sort of are in a journey or struggle to find product market fit. So you enlightened me saying that that's par for the course. That is pretty much about it, right? That epiphany just hit me like, wow, especially for somebody in marketing. Because essentially part of what marketing does before figuring out what is the content and the distribution, how to bring conversation to the top of the funnel, at the very beginning is finding this PMF. Who is it for? Is there a big enough thing? So that sort of hit me like a truck. And what do you have to say about that particular?
Sure. So I typically imagine software to be very close to business at a substantially large scale. So that's what makes a lot of difference to these sort of metrics. For example, if you're opening up a shop, so the success rate might be different because you have a captive audience, supply demand gets matched and your business works fantastically, right? Typically in engineering setup or in a software setup where entry barriers are low. So if you can build it, others can also build it, right? And if it is obvious, then somebody would have built it by now. So you are always building stuff which are absolutely new or expected to be absolutely new. And with keeping in mind that you're not going beyond what the environment requires. Okay. Which means if you are too far in the future, then you may tank. If you are too late, then also you may tank. Yeah. So you will have to be building the right products at the right time for the right audience, and which is perhaps part of the cycle. And which is why you don't have all the information right up front. You have to go with some part of the gut. So which is where it becomes little art and more or less of a science and more of an art. And otherwise, had everything been possible through Excel sheets, then somebody would have done it by now. The product would have been in place. It's already there. Somebody would have created a platform out of it, things like that. So that explains the success rate being there. And I think it's healthy success rate. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Exactly. No, and you were also telling me that this percentage is skewed towards B2C and B2B. I think the percentage of PMS and B2B is a little better.
Yeah. So the difference between B2B and B2C is typically B2B would have somebody who is custodian of that thought process. They are beside the people who are building it. And that's usually the expected case. If that is the case, then somebody else is giving you the true inputs or right feedbacks right in time. And you don't have to worry about the demand not being present, for example. However, in B2C, because the number of people might be much larger, it might be a little more difficult to solve for everyone. In B2B, you might have to start with somebody and handle it. So fundamentally, they may sound similar. The only difference is in B2C, the selling process is going to happen multiple times. So if it's an e-commerce website, you would want millions of people to give it a try and make it work. For B2B, if you have one client, then one client will internally have customers. So you sell it once but make use of it thousands of times. So the process is slightly different, and then usually in B2B the number is slightly better, unless you are building something without keeping your context in mind, or you're not speaking to any of your potential clients.
Absolutely.
Then that could lead to issues.
Absolutely. Wonderfully said. I think this is where I wanted to craft our conversation today, our chat today into three different segments. One, my perspective is I'm not a product guy. I'm an out-and-out marketing fellow. And I worked with a B2C SaaS, few companies, but primarily into B2B SaaS right now. So I help from a point of view of content marketing so that the market can educate itself before saying, yes, this is for me. I have this problem. These are the right people. Help me understand why you're the right fit. That to me is the value which many B2B SaaS companies miss. So from that perspective, I want to understand how are great products built? And I've split this into three sections. One is what is the value of understanding your customer in building a great product? Number one. Number two, what is the value of understanding your market at large in building great products? And finally, how do you build great product teams? So I want to begin with the first segment, understanding the customer to build great products. So how do you approach gathering customer feedback to drive product development in your experience? How do you see that happen?
Sure. So yeah, as you rightly pointed out, it's good that we are starting from users first. That's 101 lesson for a product manager. And they are expected to be customer obsessed. So be it B2B, B2C, any company, you have to be obsessed with customer and their needs. And the first thing which comes into picture is how do you understand what are they looking for? And there are multiple ways. There's no one holy grail, but typically I just bucketize them into three large buckets. So one of them is remote, like you don't have to get engaged personally. But remote and public, what I mean by remote and public is App Store reviews, for example, right? Or YouTube comments, or any of the places where customers are speaking good or bad about your product or the company. That's one. Second one is remote, but actively chased. So something like you see the feedback forms on your web page, or whenever you complete a user flow, then you see inputs then and there, or you're coming back after a long time, then typically a customer is asked certain questions, or even if you're not doing any of these things, there are screen recordings. So if you're not actively answering, your actions are actually giving those inputs, or your analytics is recording some of those key steps or key clicks that you're doing. So all of these are remote, but asking directly to the end consumer. And third one is in person. So between all of these things, it's the stack ranking is one is easier to do, and the other one is a little more difficult. The third one is a little more time taking, but the granularity is also in the reverse order. So when you are seeking on a public forum, you might see something. You might have to think a lot about how valuable these information are. The second one would be a little more pinpointed, because you know what you are looking for and you have data-backed information rather than just subjective information. Third one is in person, and then typically when I say in person, it's more like either one-on-one conversations, or it could be focus groups. So it changes depending on the size of the company. Smaller companies might have few people, larger ones will create focus groups and tackle them that way, or send out surveys, questionnaires or something. So these are some of the usual methods typically people deploy to get or hear back from the customers.
Does a product team always tackle these three simultaneously, or it depends on the stage of the product, how mature it is, how many users they have, depending on these contexts? So they pick and choose how to verify customer feedback. Is it fair to say?
Yeah. So there are two vectors here. One is the stage of the company which you are part of.
Right.
The other one is the product life cycle. So when I say stage of the company, like smaller companies and larger companies have different mechanisms. and the life cycle of product, which means is it day zero of the product, is it conceptualized versus, so is it pre-planning phase, or is it in development phase or later on, so that the methodology changes. And if you're thinking about, let's say, a large scale MNC, you might have a UX research team, or you might have dedicated PMs focused on some of these things. Because the problem statement are larger enough and you need a lot of inputs, you may want to validate a lot of these things with one solution being validated through other user segments. So there are a lot of things going on in a larger product, in a larger company, and in an existing product. So if you're thinking of, let's say, changing operating system, so you can't really start and do one research and end it.
Correct.
But if you're building a startup, then you don't have luxury of time or people or money, which is where you might start from one and then keep moving on the basis of whatever is more relevant at that point in time.
Right. Is it the same with the B2B, or is there a different kind of application?
Interesting. So with B2B or SaaS companies, usually, like I said earlier, the question is that we are building the product, but it needs to be built for somebody.
Correct.
And that somebody, if it's on day zero of the product, and if you know that there's a demand and you're basically supplying it, you can think of it like a services company, for example. Like every service company is also building a product, but it's actually, rather than building for masses, it's catering to one client. So if there is a bank coming to a services company, they are asking for a product, and then that bank is building stuff with whatever strategy or expertise they have in mind, right? And usually in those cases, the research or these things are a lot driven by those companies, because they might have a lot of information which otherwise may not be present in the ecosystem. But if you are building something like, for example, a game, then in those cases, this is a B2C company, or you don't know what may work, what may not. And you may want to like try out a snippet or a small part of it with a lot of people and see traction, etc. So B2Cs will be a different ballgame. B2B would be mostly driven by the clients, the initial clients.
Right. For example, a company launches a particular product. Okay, it truly understands the users, and they may want to solve an adjacent problem or a completely different problem to the same company. For example, in your case, the bank example, they might either want one particular solution or at least 2-3 different solutions to solve 2-3 different problems. So each problem where a product or a solution is created, this journey of truly understanding what the problem is from a user's perspective has to be taken for each of the products. It's essentially like building 4 different products, so you pay attention to how users use these 4 different solutions, right?
So if I've understood your question correctly, you're asking a larger product with 4 different problems that it is solving for? Is that how you're picturing this as?
I'd say, for example, there is a company which sells an ERP, then an HR product. So if that is the case, 2 extremely different business functions, essentially 2 different products anyway, they have to find the use case or the user experience here as well as there. Essentially 2 different products, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so the story always starts with the user, and which is where as a product person or whoever is figuring out the plan needs to first ensure that it identifies the right user that the product is expected to cater to.
Right.
So usually in a setup where ERP, CRM, many of the large applications are being put in place, there could be more than one user which might come into picture. Right?
Yeah.
So which is where it becomes tricky, that would you want to solve for everyone? Do you want to start for one and then add other one? And which is where it's actually not black and white. It's a little grayish there. You may start with one with an anticipation that once we have solved this problem for one guy, let's say your sales team, the problem of sales teams gets catered, then you go to the adjacency with the operations team. So everyone might be using some form of some tool. It could be physical, paper, pen, Excel sheets, or another application. So there was something that is going on there anyways. Now, as a part of your product building process, whether you include it or not really depends on a lot of factors, actually. It depends on what is the benefit that you are getting for those other set of people. So you crack problem for one, and then you demonstrate the benefit to that one.
Right.
But that doesn't really mean always that the second guy will also get equal benefit. So mind you, everyone has their own KPIs they're chasing. Right. So everyone is chasing their own KPIs.
Correct.
So a 2x benefit of one persona may not always be a 2x benefit to the other one.
Correct.
And your tool may not in its usual form give that much of a benefit to the other one.
Correct.
Usually it does have some advantage of integration, keeping things there. But then there is a concept of, if you see from an engineering parlance, usually like there was a monolith architecture and then there is a microservice architecture. Right? Both have their pros and cons. Similarly, in this product building, you have their advantages and disadvantages. If you bring everything together, one small change here might have trickle down cascading impact everywhere. So you may not want to do that kind of or you may not want to put that much of a risk.
Correct.
Unless that justifies the advantage that it brings to the table.
Right.
So for example, again, coming back to operating system, it's basically everything plugged into one place, but they're not adding every small solution in the operating system. They expect it to be plug and play.
Right.
So it really depends on the use case and the force multiplier or the advantage that is bringing to the table.
I mean, this is more probably abundant in the B2B side. For example, if there is a marketing tool, be it automation or not, and there is an angle where even the CFO or the finance team can have their own report or dashboard or functionality built into it, so that because the CFO is always wants to be aware of what, how much money is going in and what is the ROI, etc., etc. So the primary user is always the marketing persona. The second order benefits probably for this thing. Fair enough. I think that was beautifully explained.
Yeah, that will always be the case. And the interesting thing is a lot of these products which are present in the market, you might see there is substantial amount of overlap, which means if there's an emailing solution, it might have some other lead cleaning processes. And everyone started from one and then went on to adjacencies, and which is where there's a point in time when they will have overlaps.
Right.
And then from a company perspective, whoever is taking such an application or maybe somebody who is building, they'll also have to think about what are their core competencies.
Right.
So each of them specializes in one, but a lot of their clientele uses them for other purposes.
Right. Fair.
Right. For example, one CMS I was evaluating some time back. So it was content management system, but that is being used for powering e-commerce as a backend. So I'm not sure if they thought about it to be used in that fashion or not, but then when they build a beautiful product, which was decoupled enough, then another use case came in, and I'm sure that's the time when the product team would have seen, oh, this looks like an interesting use case and adjacency, we might just go there.
And also purely sometimes it is an out-and-out business decision. For example, to improve unit economics or LTV, if you sell this particular product to this particular business, and it can be extended to others, which can draw off of the main product itself and order benefits, you can extract more value, more revenue from it anyway, right?
Yeah. So the ROI of that application goes up for everyone,
correct,
the supplier and the person who is consuming it.
Correct.
So there's an advantage, which is where again these are the trade-offs. So whenever there's a software acquisition problem statement comes into place, somebody would have to do those analysis and figure out, does it command or require additional application, right? For everything, for example, Excel sheet just works. For half of the world, or for a lot of these problem statements, it just starts from an Excel sheet as a solution, which is why I appreciate Excel sheets a lot, because you can build anything and everything. You spoke about CFO dashboards. A lot of CFOs just use or extract data from different tools, applications, these fancy ones, but end up seeing it in their own Excel sheets.
Exactly. I was about to say that, because I'm sure a lot, especially in B2B, a lot of product marketers in the B2B, if you go back to their rooms or their desks or their cubicles, I'm sure there is a photograph of Bill Gates with the darts on his face because they hate the person who created Excel, and we are not able to sell our product because Excel is so simple and it's already solving a problem. At the same time, like you said, what do we do when we have to present marketing data to the CEO or the founder or the CFO? Excel, go back to the Excel sheet and present it like that. I mean, the simplicity of the product is so unbelievable.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't beat simplicity.
Yeah, you reach a stage where it becomes the de facto standard. Like right now, if somebody has to create a balance sheet or a P&L or any of these things, the simplest one is an Excel sheet, but nobody would have thought about a register, like a long back people were doing. But that has dramatically changed. But from Excel sheet to the other ones, that is partly there, partly not there. It depends on larger companies. Of course, they don't use it the way smaller companies use it.
Correct.
But that's how a B2B application is expected to behave in a longer term. Like it just becomes, like it is there, but it is transparent.
Right.
Like you don't realize that you are using it day in and day out.
Invisible.
It should be invisible.
Exactly. Absolutely. Fantastic. So I want to bring a conversation back to what you said a few minutes ago about the 3 buckets to understand customer feedback. Obviously, one, public forums, then you observe what people do on your own application, and obviously you ask them what it is. How can product teams or product managers extract genuine, authentic reviews? Because sometimes right from the bucket 1 to bucket 3, the granularity or the message can go from abstract to extreme detail. Right from public forum, you can understand a sense of bad reviews or anything, right to the point where you actually interview somebody, you can ask engineer questions and ask to a particular point and get exactly the same answer. But what is the challenge of getting authentic responses? How do they do it?
Yeah, that's a good question because with so much of information and digital information going on, it's easier to get sunk in that information and always have a colored view. And there's a concept of confirmation bias, for example. Whatever you feel like, you just want to hear more of that. And at some point in time, it might become an echo chamber. So, which is where it becomes tricky. And it's tricky because as a product person, you will have to keep your own thoughts outside of yourself when you're listening to somebody. And it's not easy. It's difficult. And then if there are vanity metrics or some other things which might just showcase some improvements, you might get drifted in those directions. So, for example, like if support tickets are going down, so it might just feel like, hey, looks like we have done a good job. But it could be the other way around, which is nobody cares for your product or your problem anymore, and then they stopped complaining. So it becomes tricky when you are talking to customers. But the real challenge, or the way I see it is, it really starts from what is the grander question that you're trying to get an answer for, right? So it should always start from there. And if you go back one step behind this, it also depends on what stage your product is at right now. So rather than asking all sort of random questions, it should be pinpointed, right? Now, first problem statement is, or let's bucketize into 3 buckets. One is you should know who are you going to ask those questions. So again, public forum, this person, that person, everyone will have their own opinion, but you should have some understanding on who are you asking for. Then in what context are you asking? When I say with what context, you're talking about, is it early stage of the product or late stage or mid stage, whatever. And then the third one is, how are you asking those questions, right? Let me double click on these one by one, right? So first one is more like a user segmentation, right? When you want to listen to something, you want to know, for example, if you're building a product for finance or some of these things are, it's very easy to say that it might be useful for a lot of people, right? But you can't just call everyone as one single persona. It's usually going to mess up your information, your feedbacks, because some people would be more educated, less educated. They would be in their own life cycle or education level for each of these products, right? You can't build for everyone. And if you have to build for everyone, then it will require more of your time. And then your feedback loop also goes for a toss, because you build something for persona A and showcase it to persona B, and you will end up thinking, maybe it's not working, while just you shuffled around the things, right? So that segmentation is important. There's usually a different process that goes into segmentation. Again, depends a lot on the size of the customer base. Smaller ones are simpler, larger ones are difficult. Some of those things are also done through data science, for example, like segmentation for a really large scale application, right? So that's where the story starts from. Again, going back to starting from users first. Which user? Then in what context? Because if this is a product that you're building from scratch, then you should have questions or feedbacks that are more pointed towards, like maybe think of it like a 10x benefit, or is it something that will change their lives to some extent, right? You're not talking about incremental benefits, like a little bit here and there, because they might just say good things, but they might not leave their existing way of doing things for yours, right? So, which is where it needs to be a little more pointed that way. And then third one is, how are you asking those questions? Which is more like asking, rather than asking, did you like my product? Which again, people would say good things about you, or somebody might just say a lot of bad things about you, but you can't really take it on the face value. So, the other way of asking those questions would be more like, which other features did you like? Or what did you not like? Because it would be interesting to note, like, a lot of us would use a certain product, keep cursing it, but still use it. Because the expectation from that product is at a different degree. But there is no competition, which is why I'm still using it. But which is an opportunity for somebody else, not for you right now, but you need to solve for it. And then the other set, which is, will always say good things about you, but they're not revealing their true reasons of using it, and then they might just jump out the moment they get something better, right? For example, instant messenger, right? People have been using one, then they moved on to another one. Of course, there's network effects which will prevent them from doing it, but still people moved on, right?
Correct.
And having said that, if you're asking some questions to somebody who is very close to you, so now this is called as mom's test, basically. That's the name. What it means is, if you are asking some questions to your sales team or your operations team, so a lot depends on your relationships with them. And similar to if you ask a question to your mom, will my business work? There's a very low chance she would give you an answer like, no, I don't think it will work. She will most likely say, you are going on the right track.
Confident.
So yeah, so that happens in the business world quite a lot. Depends on who is asking the question, then who is the question being asked for, and how vocal are they not. So all of those needs to be decluttered, and there's a book by the same name, Mom's Test, which explains these things in detail. How do you ensure that you get the right, you ask the right questions to get the right feedback.
Right. Fantastic. I mean, are there any examples in your journey as a product guy of taking customer feedback and driving it into the product and seeing a significant upside? Can you give us at least one such example?
Sure. So long back, I was in making my trip. So I was taking care of the rail and bus division there. And this is that point in time when IRCTC was the de facto strategy. So we all know how crazy was it in using a platform like that, and especially if you're trying to book a Tatkal ticket. So it's fastest finger first at that time, right? And when I was there, as a product manager, I was looking for information about what should we be building, and there would be all sort of feedbacks coming in, mostly like, I just want my ticket. I couldn't get it, right? So those are the verbatims which come out from users, which is not actionable, right? Of course, everyone wants tickets, but what should you be doing for that, right? And but when you start asking more questions to these people, like what happened? So there could be multiple reasons. Like one is they are not very sure about their travel date and time, for example, or they are flexible, but then they are racing against time. Like the moment window opens up, I just want to make a booking.
Yeah.
So they will ask 10 people to make a booking, and then something will be in wait list, something will be RAC, something will confirm, then they will have to go back and cancel tickets. Like, so it's a huge pain point that they had, but they couldn't actually communicate in a product language. Of course, customers cannot, which is where when we thought about it and gathered more insights from the users, what we realized is like perhaps they are looking for something where they need to have all those iterations happening in a quicker time frame. So this is the time when the ICT website has an option of filling in 3-4 fields before they move ahead. Like you have to tell what date, what class, and what quota. Like putting those 3 fields itself take precious 5 seconds of your time. By that time, the tickets would be gone. What we did as a solution to that is building a page where these things, rather than being a question, were pre-decided and provided right up front. For example, you just put your from and to and date. Actually, date was also flexible. Like you put one date, but adjacent dates will show up. Other classes will get shown up. Other quotas will get shown up. And then you just tap. You don't re-render the entire page. So you don't have to go back and start your journey again. You are on the same page. Whatever you have done is retained. And then you keep changing the variables that you want and move ahead. So this was sort of an innovation back in those days, which got used by other competitors. And now even ICTC has a similar design of doing that. And that is something that I believe that it came out from users in a way, rather than it's not serendipity that we were thinking of. One of our users asked or thrown this as a product statement, like I would want it this way. But then it's more up to the product team to understand how valuable that insight is. Right? And then validate it, figure out, is it really genuine? Is it something that has potential to solve problem for everyone? If it does, then you run POCs, prototypes, user test, beta test, and then that's usually the product course, and you solve it there.
Fantastic. I mean, isn't it the case where most simplest of solutions which come through insights seems obvious at the end, but it isn't. Actually, this idea of, in your example of Make My Trip, this idea of achieving speed at the same time giving control to the user. Now that builds trust. Like nothing. That's a phenomenal example. Thank you. So now I want to move from the user to the market. So if the user is the first concentric circle and a little outside, and how do the product managers or builders gain a deeper understanding about their market?
So, yeah, that's interesting because, of course, customers come first, irrespective of everything. So, if you know somebody who is facing some pain points, that's your primary source, or the first thing to start off with. Then there are some other usual mechanisms that people typically deploy. Like some of them are in the books and everyone does it. Think of it like primary research, secondary research, right? So if I'm talking about secondary research, there are white papers being written, there are industry reports, there are companies specializing in creating those reports. So there's no dearth of written material out there. It's more like how well or how fast somebody can process these informations, clean it up and understand it. There are applications, there are paid applications which actually let you research specifically on certain topics. So those are the go-to places for a lot of things. And primary research would be, if you're not talking to your customers, there are, let's say, customer advisory boards or somebody, the industry experts who you would have thought of as a go-to people. Or there would be conferences, webinars, trade shows. So, and a lot of these B2B companies typically use all of these mechanisms because you are not hearing from your end customers directly. You are mostly connected with your business clients. and you need to be there wherever they are. So in their
Right.
trade shows, in their industry events, and then there are companies who manage and organize those events. So that's the reason why these companies or people would want to be part of that forum. So whether it is electronics have its own, developers have their own symposiums, go there and then get those insights on what's happening around the world and be connected with the surroundings.
One fact of empathy I have with product people is because they live their life on designed by time. There's so much to do. They're always building something or validating something. In your experience, working at such established companies or building something from scratch and making it established, how often do product marketers get time or even energy to focus on, okay, let me take at least, say, dedicate an hour every week to understand what is happening? One is the active part of it. For example, you actually make time for yourself to attend this webinar, even when you sit at a desk, or you go to this event, or you download this white paper and read it. And then there is passive way where you subscribe to a podcast and newsletter, or social media has become such a big thing, especially Reddit and its own subclusters of. So do product people do they have that freedom to make enough time while it is mandatory, obviously? What is the usual case? How does it work?
Yeah, interesting. So the default answer for this is they don't have time for doing all of these things. They usually would not. But which is where, if you think from a product person's life cycle, the most of the time that they will get is in their early days to put this in practice. So one thing which I usually do for anyone who's joining my team, the first few days or first week, I ask them to just talk to the potential customers or clients, because you are not in that rhythm at that point in time. You're not biased by what's already being discussed in the organization, and you come with a fresh mind. So that's where the story really starts from. And then it's more of a question on how efficient a person is and how valuable they feel it's going to be in their journey and the product's journey, right? If they don't do it, the implications of this always come back to the product at some point in time. If you remain disconnected, then you're not doing justice to what you are supposed to be doing. Now, how to get time for it is a different problem. Now, which is where as your life proceeds in the product domain, you typically become efficient on some of the things. So you're learning a few things originally or in the initial days, but then you become master of it. Then whatever is taking 1 day for you might just start taking 1 hour or 2 hours for you. You become efficient, and then you create space in your schedule and put some dedicated time. So there are organizations which actually pushes people to have dedicated time slots where they will just talk to people. And then you might have heard about certain CEOs and some people who have their dedicated time allocated. And it's required. It's more about how somebody manages to do it.
I also see leaders who try and influence and push this as a habit, because Slack is an unbelievable product. Again, look at how beautiful Slack is, because I'm sure there is always a channel for product related updates. There is always a channel on technology or engineering updates. So there is always information flowing. It's just obviously as product builders may become more efficient and start dedicating a sliver of time here and there, I think that is how they stay up to date. Fantastic. And Nishant, I have one interesting question. With this, a lot of noise and the so-called potential on artificial intelligence, Gen AI, how to anticipate future market needs for a product person? How do they do that? For example, in the case of Gen AI, how do they make this connection? Say, have these types of users or customers, then there is something mind-boggling and like Gen AI. How do they connect the dots?
Interesting. So nowadays, no conversation goes without having some part of it dedicated to Gen AI. Yeah, but all rightfully so, because of course it is expected to change the way the things are moving around, right? And it's the interesting part is you might always see there is some implications, but you'll always have some doubt or lack of clarity on how useful is it cost effective or not, and things like that. But usually, from a Gen AI perspective, my viewpoint is it's basically going through different stages one by one. So what we see right now is a platform that is available now. The business use cases for the end customers or end products are being thought of. So in whether it is job market or whether it is consulting market, it's basically full of discussions around Gen AI for various reasons. So every industry, whatever it might be, is thinking of what is their Gen AI equivalent, because if they don't do it, somebody else will. So the discussions is always ongoing everywhere. So now the way it would happen, in my opinion, is there are certain use cases. Let's just think about it in 3 stages. Like first one being the uses where it helps people find some resources. So the way I see it, the first bucket as whatever is what Google did to library, Gen AI is expected to do to Google. So people used to have libraries back then, but and everything was there, but it was just difficult to get information. Google just created an easy way of doing it. Now Google became that library. Everything is there, but it is so tricky to get an answer.
Correct.
And now we're talking about newer generation who have lesser of patience. They want everything quicker, which is where the solution come into picture, and then simplifies the identification or finding those resources, information in a quicker time frame. So search and all of these things are going to get transformed, right?
Correct.
Second one is the place where people can create certain things for references. But when I say create for references, they are not using it as is, but mostly like if you have seen PowerPoint or Copilot, for example, or PowerPoint has this designer option where you do a few things and then it gives a version or color to it, and then you see what you want to retain and not retain, right? That's the second big use case that comes into picture. And the third big bucket is create for production use. When I say create for production use, it means it doesn't just, the output of the Gen AI is not just for human consumption. It's mostly putting back into the tech stack.
Right.
For example, there's an application, Sentry, which does error logging. Now it has a mechanism to identify the causes of errors, right? Or going a little deeper and solving the pain point which a developer had. So that's one of the use case, right? And similarly, there are other use cases, which means for product managers, if they're running experiments, right? So that was a manual task, used to take a lot of time, and we are talking about efficiency. Now, this is one of the efficiencies which can come by, which is it can run those experiments given the constraints and improvise and optimize based on what is the long-term plan. Similar things can happen to marketing messages if somebody is manually figuring out and running those experiments. Now, those experiments can be run on a sample size, figure out if it is significant data or not, improvise on it. So a lot of these things might become a production use case where it's just an additional layer of automation. So whatever is a repetitive task and not a creative task will be passed on to Gen AI, is what I feel. And humans or people would mostly be directed towards a higher creative work, or the work where somebody has to take a lot of risk of failing. So because that's one thing which I feel Gen AI will always not optimize for.
Absolutely.
So if you're thinking something totally out of the box, which has supremely high failure rate, the chances are that in the experimentation it will be falling off.
Correct.
But those are the bespoke experiences or the unique things, the creative things, which will still will have to be done manually.
Fair enough. I think some of it will be passed on to Gen AI, like you rightly said. repetitive ones, not so creative ones, and even in the creative field, while Gen today cannot compete with human creativity, but it is facilitating it.
Of course.
Presentations or copywriting, etc. Whatever. I mean, even in terms of image generation, DALL-E and diffusion, etc. So far we've spoken about staying updated about the market and about what product people should do. Have you noticed, or are there any pitfalls or mistakes product people do when paying attention to market? Because there are so many rabbit holes. If you dig into one and you can go into it so deep, and how do you even take what you get and say how much can be applied to your product or business? What mistakes or pitfalls you see?
So, yeah, some of them are the common mistakes, which people, like everyone knows about it, but it is a little tricky to adhere to some of these things. For example, the way I usually imagine a product to be is good people come together with good processes to create good products. So, if any of these steps are lacking behind or not optimized, then it might lead to bad problem or bad solution, right? So, and one more additional thing, people, process, and the context. When I say context, you might have good people and you are ensuring that they are doing the right thing in the right way, but the industry is not ripe or the environment is not ripe, right? One thing which I feel is underappreciated or is usually the trickiest of the part is understanding the environment or the context, right? Which is the homework that goes in, which is the sweat that you have to give out without seeing any progress in the product. So it is often thought as not a progress because you're just thinking, you're figuring out research and you're trying to establish the product in your mind first and trying to understand the market size, right? All of these things. But if not done correctly, then it percolates down every other step. Like you might overestimate the size of the market, or you might underestimate. In all of these cases, it might be leading to a problem because the strategy changes. If you're underestimating the market, then the solution that you're putting in place is not the one that you are expecting to make. And if you're thinking or bloating up the size of the market and you're just thinking everything will get transformed, and it's also not good. Second one is when you talk about pitfalls, if you have these people and process, a lot of people, or many times, the common pitfall is like not thinking a lot about users and segmentation of those, right? Which is thinking one size fit all kind of a way of thinking, which doesn't always help. So segmentation is critical no matter what. Even if it is a smaller user base, it might still be better. You might not have the other segments in your target audience, but you have to know that there are other people whom you may want to handle in future. And if they are already there, your product thinking should separate them out because the solution or the plan might be very distinctly different from them. So those are the common ones. Otherwise, other things which people lack is many times the resilience to keep moving on. Like we were talking about the failure rate, for example, right? So which is where it becomes tricky. Like you have to be convinced deep down that it's going to work, but it should not turn into a wild goose chase. So, but which means that you have to have a mechanism to iterate fast. So fail fast is one methodology which people have, but for various reasons, typically it gets difficult to do that. Like everyone would be either very hopeful, let's build everything, not build the MVP, or if they are building the MVP, are they building the right one? Are they? So like the usual example is building a car, right, with two wheels. Is that sufficient or not? So, which is where it becomes again a little hard. How do you plan for the smaller POC or the MVP, which gives you enough results to move on to the next step, and double down going further.
Fair enough. Fantastic. So Nishant, we've so far spoken about paying attention to customers, users, and then the market. Now I want to shift focus on building product teams. According to you, what are some good or great characteristics that make successful product teams?
Hmm. So when you say product teams, you're including product managers,
Right.
analytics,
Exactly. All
designers,
yeah,
everyone,
yeah.
right? Okay. So, yeah, so some of the, and a lot of these things have been thought of by a lot of masters of this trade.
Mm.
And one thing which I appreciate a lot and which puts it in one place is the Amazon leadership principles.
Mm.
I really appreciate the thought that has gone in. So it shows up in various forums in different terminologies, but it just beautifully keeps everything in one place. Like, what should be the traits somebody should have from a person perspective? So when you talk about team, it's basically comprising of individual members and the mechanism to bind them together, right? And the story really starts from the individuals first. So there are certain characteristics that they should exhibit, which is like how deep they are willing to go, and how cooperative they are, how understanding they have, how much of an understanding of other functions do they have. So and how curious they are, how much of an ownership that they have of their own stuff. What is their own vision for themselves few years down the line, right? So some of these things are like usual common traits which come into picture. And the other common trait which comes into picture is the customer centricity. So whether it is product managers, of course, product managers have to be obsessed with customers. There's no questions around that. But a lot of other folks which are also part of product team, which is designers, for example. Of course, designers by trade also are expected to be a lot customer focused, because whatever they are doing is supposed to be. But engineers are also supposed to be thinking that way. So all of these, the common customer centricity will ensure the frictions between the team is lesser. So they will have common vision. They are not solving the problem for the higher ups. They are solving the problem for a grander vision, or the product that they are building, or the solution that they want to be part of. So in order to form a team, people, processes, and the mechanism to bind them, the vision that holds them together, how passionate are they, and whoever is orchestrating this team, what are their mechanisms for rewarding the good behaviors or cooperation among team. So some of the things might happen within the office premises, some of the things might happen outside of office premises. But a well-functioning product team would be usually the one where each person understands their role and responsibilities, appreciate others' roles and responsibilities, and will have a mechanism to work efficiently between them.
Right.
So that's how I visualize this.
Yeah. Now going back to that very important point you made, binding all these individuals together, how do leaders put them all together and make them collaborate? Because right from engineering, product, UI, UX, design, as well as sales and marketing, all of them have a role to play in creating a kick-ass product which actually solves problem for a real validated use case. So how much of a challenge is it making all of this work together? You mostly touched upon all of these things. The reason why I'm asking this question, let's say in the context of remote work, I mean, because product building is such a collaborative endeavor, how much of a challenge is a problem like remote working?
Sure. So let's start with the collaboration bit first, and then we will put it in the context of remote work specifically. Now, if we break down what does collaboration mean, like typically collaboration would be exhibited in a verbal form, or in a written form, or in a non-verbal form, right? So I usually try to think in a MECE approach, where what are the possible options where communication or collaboration might come in play, right? Now, in order to ensure that there is collaboration between the team, first of all, things would be required in terms of infrastructure, right? When I say infrastructure, what is the communication tools. So a lot of organizations would actually go through this process of identifying the right channels and would have in place. So a lot of people would take it as a given. But when the company is in a formative stage, some of these things are yet to be established, which means when do you use emails, or when do you use instant messaging, or when do you use ticketing mechanism, right? Or when do you use meetings, face-to-face, daily stand-ups? There are so many mechanisms of communication, but every team figures out what communication falls in which bucket. And that typically happens to be in the order of urgency and the impact it provides or people it requires. So that infrastructure needs to be established first from whoever is custodian of this collaboration. Usually CPOs or CTOs are the ones who lead such a front. So infrastructure is the first one that needs to be handled. The other one is more about when you have a structure of communication. What is the grander vision that you pass on to the team? So again, another very underestimated tool, but usually it needs to be verbalized in a way where everyone have the entire team should have a common understanding of the vision and not their own version, which can tear apart the team because they might have conflicts among themselves. Now, whether it is people within a team or multiple teams, so whatever structure that you put in place, pods or within the pods, it needs to have some way of binding the OKRs together, the vision together. So usually, like if there's a business equation, like which pod is solving for which part of the equation, and what happens when you have to make a trade-off. So there would be cases where the trade-off needs to be taken, but instead of turning out to be a fight between people or team, it should be an understanding that should go in, like we are doing this because we are optimizing for this problem, but that doesn't mean that we underappreciate the other one. So some of these things are part of regular collaboration methods, and then there are software aspects. So some are structural, some are softer ones. Now, softer ones will be like, how do you encourage empathy within the team, right? How do you ensure cross-functional learning? So not everyone knows everything, right? And they will not appreciate the other one till the time they know part of it. Like an engineering person should know that design requires multiple steps and it's not done overnight. And design should know that engineering requires multiple steps and it's not done overnight. For example, I'm just giving an example out there. So the more interdisciplinary the team is, or the more they have understanding among themselves about each other, it might just be a little more collaborative in some way. And then you will have to ensure that there is an open communication mechanism. People should not be afraid about talking their mind. They should have some sense of belongingness, that they belong together and not in silos. Usually in a company or a team which is less than 10 members, it's not a big problem to have. And this is something which I've heard from a startup incubator long back, where the politics and all of these things start kicking in at the size of 15 members team, and then it changes its form and shape at 50 members, 100 members, right? So there are specific milestones of formation of teams, and the mechanism or the way to handle it changes based on the team size. Right. Of course, what I'm putting as an assumption is you have the right set of people at the right point in time. So first 15 members is not same as the next 50 members. And their soft skills or mechanism to work with each other is very drastically different from the other set.
Right. Fair enough. Right. I want to talk about the leader who binds all the product professionals together, the CPO. While some of the responsibility of the CPO is to make all of these people work together with a singular vision, what else falls under the CPO's sort of radar? What else does he or she do?
Yeah. So CPO, or actually any CXO for that matter, is expected to have an understanding of all the other larger, broader functions. So that's the true expectation. So, and which is where, from a product person's perspective, the role is less execution, more strategy, or more wider net, right? That way. Now, again, depending on the size of the company, the role might change a little bit. But in smaller the company size is, they are more connected with the execution layer, or they have the luxury of being connected to the execution layer. The larger the company is, the role really transforms itself into something which is a little more outward facing or a little more strategic in nature. When I say outward facing, somebody in a large MNC would be talking about partnerships, for example. Like, what is a company that I should acquire and plug into my product, for example, right? For example, Facebook acquired Oculus for something in mind, right? Or Google bought stakes in Motorola when they were thinking about Android. So all of these partnerships, etc., are part of the puzzle, where it is part technology, part product, part business, all of these things together, and everyone plays a role in there. Now, for the smaller of the companies, the role is a lot about being a visionary, being a thought leader, somebody who is like bringing a concept out there for people to work around. Like, I see the future state of the product in this form and shape.
Right.
And when I say that, it's not just one PRD, it's more like a strategic vision, which can internally be converted into smaller projects, problems, and being worked upon and work together in a function, right? And then collaborate with other business functions. Like, if it is not a SaaS company, then there will be a lot of other functions, or even if it's in SaaS company, sales, operations, on-ground staff. Now, people within the CPO org will not have time and luxury of speaking with everyone else, which is where CPO is that decoupler or the interface, which brings in or filters that or refines that information and creates into actionables for the team. And in turn is responsible for the ROI of that team.
Right.
So ROI is essentially what is the size of the team which can produce certain result for the business and answerable to the CEO for that as a metric. So which is where HR comes in, or the role of setting up the team comes into picture, right? It's partly that responsibility, then being a customer advocate, ensuring the culture is set right up front, and you don't take any, you don't optimize for short term. So that's the role of CPO. Always keep between a trade-off between short term and long term. You always optimize for long term, and have a viewpoint on whenever a team is trying to undercut at any point in time, to course correct them and ensure that rather than optimizing for a quarter or figuring out a quick solution all the time, which might land the company into trouble later on, how do you ensure that the team is well oiled and well functioning for the grander goal in hand?
Fantastic. I want to talk about something which you mentioned, thought leadership from a CPU or a CXO point of view. I want to know how much time or how CPOs spend their time online on forums and events and social media and stuff like that. For example, how often do they listen or read to understand what's happening in the market, something like on LinkedIn or Insta or whatever the platform is? Either it's a community network or it is a forum dedicated to a particular thing. How often do they do that? For example, how often do they log in or active on such?
Yeah. So part of it is expected out of them, which is how well connected are they. So whenever somebody gets hired at that level, they are expected to have those connections, which can give them the right inputs. Now, when I say right inputs, of course, there's a digital mechanism. Like, they have time to read and research on things. But my viewpoint is, usually if something has been written and is democratized, if the knowledge is democratized, then it's perhaps a little late. Somebody has already written about it. So somebody else is already working on it. And by the time you think about it, the product or somebody else would have the product out in the market. So if we are expecting CPO to be ahead of the plan for everyone else, digital medium is one of the sources to ensure maybe they are connected with the on-ground realities. But the other channels which come in play is typically, let's say, investors. They might have some viewpoints on where the economy is going, right? Or the other thought leaders in the game, right? For example, gaming used to have graphic cards long back, like even in 90s, the concept was already there. But somebody thought about using this as a problem for a solution in data science later on, right? It wasn't originally thought to be doing that, but it went into that direction. Then graphic cards are being used for crypto mining and other places also. Now it opened up a method and all the adjacencies came into place. So, but they have to be present in the places where other creative stuff is happening. So if the technology is moving around, it could be that it's not your industry right now, but you should still have some understanding on what's going on, because someday somebody might just use that as a mechanism to create a competing solution around you.
Right. Fantastic. Now you mentioned, Nishant, the different hats CPU wears in terms of driving the business, generating, justifying the ROI for the product investment, the product team's investment itself. So what is the relationship of a CPO or a CXO with a CEO? For example, if one is the engine of a car, the other is the steering, where they have the control to steer this particular moving vehicle to a particular place. What does the relationship look like?
Sure. So CEO and CPO are expected to be usually working very closely and in tandem. And for that matter, that goes without saying for all the CXOs, they can't run in isolations.
Right.
Now, when you talk about relationship between CEO and CPO, CEO would have product and tech as one problem or solution to a problem, right? But there are other things that CEO is running after. For example, ensuring runway or investor relations, right? Or having some strategic alliances, right? All of these things are usually something which CEO has mastered upon. And the core business metrics are with CEOs or P&L. So their neck is primarily online on those things, right? Now, CPO, usually, if you think from comparison of these two roles, CPO is an executionary to a grander goal that way. What it means is if CEO has identified a problem and it uses marketing as a channel of putting it out, operations as a solution to get things together, or sales in a mechanism to bundle it and put it out. CPO is handling the creation process primarily, right? So the relationship would be bidirectional to some extent. So it's not expected that the CEO would know. CEO is interdisciplinary, just like how CPO is interdisciplinary within a product org.
Right.
CEO is interdisciplinary across multiple functions. So, and CPO, by the way, is called like CEO of their own wing,
Right.
which is where the role is similar but at a different scale. So, and usually CEO is the person who is optimizing between the role of a CMO and a CPO and CDO, right? Which is where he would know what to optimize on at what point in time. But they will usually have a very unbiased communication and very open-mindedness among themselves. And while CEOs will be more outward-facing, CPO's role, even though they would have an outward-facing element, it will be primarily inward-facing, like how well we are building those things that can stand the test of time. And how do we ensure that we continue to build upon stuff for the larger goal. So CEO might just put in, let's say, sales team and operations teams till the time it creates a buffer for the product team to build their products. Product building takes time.
Breathing space.
But increasing capacity in other things are quicker. So you might use those as an intermediate solution and give some cushion to product and engineering to build this stuff.
Correct.
And then you scale to a different degree. It's CapEx versus OpEx to some form and shape.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. I think this has been a very insightful conversation. I want to end this chat by extracting some advice or suggestions from you. I want to start with at a company level. For example, if there is an early stage SaaS company, B2C, B2B, doesn't matter, or either, what is your advice on building a good, strong foundational product team?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because that's basically, when you say foundational team, it is sort of a make or break for the company. So usually the first things to keep in mind is keep the hiring bar high. So which is where it becomes a little tricky for, let's say, smaller startups, because you want to keep the bar high, but then how do you ensure that you attract the right set of talent then, right? Mind you, you are competing with the larger MNCs for the same talent pool.
Correct.
But of course, you will have other mechanisms. Of course, there's equity and other things, and then roles that you provide, opportunity that you put in place, or the brand that you will generate for the people, right? So there are different ways of handling or providing something back to the people, and not just looking into what they are bringing to the table.
Correct.
So that's the first thing. And when you talk about keeping the bar high, the first thing that comes into picture thereafter is, what do you mean by a higher bar? Like somebody who is capable of doing something or doing it beautifully well, very efficiently, more than what they are expected to be doing. So ideally, the people should be, the foundation team member are the ones who are your potential VPs, directors, CPOs, CTOs, and XYZ, right? Going forward. So you have to hire them thinking that in mind. Can they wear that role eventually? Now, it's not, like my understanding of this is it's less of a technical aspect, but more of like a personal, interpersonal habit, because that is something that has taken a lot of years and decades for building up. So that would be of much more prominence to see people what their behavioral skills are, how do they react to failure, for example, and how do they keep themselves motivated to start with. So they should have lesser external motivations, more intrinsic motivations, for example, right? It's okay if they don't have a few things, but you know that would be something that they can get over a period of time. Right. But have some people who will think from first principles. So they will have that clarity in mind to think from basics and not succumb to short-term pressures, right? And then under-optimize, things like that. The other thing which I was going through one of the interviews by some CEO where he was mentioning about hiring from same domain or not. So that's another thing that is something that people have to think about, which is if you are getting somebody from same domain, they usually come with certain baggage. And there's a reason that whatever you are building, it's not built by that person in that other company. And you will have to think about whether you would want it that way or not. So if it is a regulatory stuff or something that needs to be copied as is in your problem statement, then you might keep people from the same domain.
Correct.
But I guess for Redverse, the founding team members were no one was from ticketing background, but they were exceptionally good people who created an exceptional product for a domain that they didn't have knowledge of, but they have the enthusiasm to solve for. So that's something that people should keep in mind and keep themselves motivated, and then have lesser. They are not blindsided by politics, for example, right? They should have passion for building a product and truly have a feel of building it rather than doing it for the sake of a job.
Fantastic. Now, I want to end this on what advice would you give aspiring product managers? We've spoken about at a company level, at an early stage. At an individual level, what do you suggest? What do you advise?
Yeah. So whenever this question gets asked to me, like usual thing which I think of is you should internalize whatever you are doing to an extent that it becomes your muscle memory. Then you don't have to think and do it. Now, for a person who is trying to build products, you keep hearing product every single time. But how many people think about themselves as a product to start with? Consider yourself as the product. What is your MVP? What is your go-to market? What is the need gap you are filling in for the market, right? So if there's a budding product manager, those are the things, or that's the thought process I want to give out to people. Like, think about from that aspect. Treat yourself as a product to start with, and try to ensure, like just like you iterate on a product multiple times with a grander goal in mind, keep iteration on yourself as well. So you might start with something, learn that skill, learn the other one, because you have to be interdisciplinary, and there's no way you would have got everything on day zero. So you might have to build a little bit of a marketing muscle, a little bit of a design muscle, engineering muscle. You should be cognizant of the fact that you know certain things, you may not know other things. You can be master of one, but you should be jack of all to some extent. And you should find your own niche. So if you are a person who is or somebody who understands payments well, that's your niche. If you understand AI well, that's your niche. If you understand videos well, that's your niche. Figure out your niche and create your own brand, and have one strong muscle and lots of revenue muscles. So it's like going to a gym. You build a lot of muscles, but you optimize on a specific muscle more than others. And that's the one that you will show off to the world. And that's the reason people will want you to be part of their journeys or their product building process, because you bring that to the table for them.
Right. What a terrific response through a wonderful analogy. Thank you so much, Nishant, for your time. How was the conversation? How did you feel?
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thanks a lot for all of these questions. So, like as a product leader, I keep thinking about all of these things, but it was a good way to sum up everything, put it in a place where it becomes useful for more people than just me.
Fantastic. I hope our audience find this conversation as insightful as I have. And let's all wish Nishant fantastic success in all his endeavors in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Your brand, raise your voice, spread your story, make that choice. Pulses high, hearts rejoice.